Hi everyone, welcome back to Zoo School Live. We have a special treat for you guys on this very, very warm, humid day. We're going to be meeting with our exhibit eagles, and Keeper Tim is going to introduce all of our eagle friends to us. So we're gonna turn it on over to him, okay?
Hey guys, how's it going today? We're really psyched to have you guys coming on into our eagle exhibit, and so that we can show you our guys, introduce you to our guys, and just teach you about eagles in general, because they're really, really cool. So come on, let's go. So first thing that everybody probably knows about bald eagles is their white heads. So bald eagles they're gonna have the white head, the white tail, and the black or brown body, except when they're young. Bald eagles they're actually born all brown, like that main part of their body. But at about 4 to 5 years of age, they lose the brown feathers on their heads and tails, and they grow in those white feathers. And that's why they're called bald eagles. They're not actually bald, they do have feathers on their head. They're just white in comparison to the rest of their body. Now, these guys are found throughout most of the US and into Canada and into Mexico a little bit as well. Their favorite places to hang out are areas near water. So if you come to the zoo and you see that they have waterfalls and they have a pond and everything, that's actually really normal for them. These guys do spend most of their time around water, and that's because their favorite food in the world is fish. So these guys are actually pretty good fishers. They'll fly over the water, spot the fish, dive down and grab it, and come out of the water with it. So these guys do eat a lot of fish, but that's not all that they eat. They do eat other small animals. But interestingly enough, these guys actually very, very often are scavengers. So they will find animals that have been killed, like roadkill, or other animals that are dead, and they'll actually eat those bodies, a lot like what you might think of with a vulture. And that's actually really, really important to have so many of those kinds of animals around. They're called carrion birds, birds that eat dead animals, because they're basically like the trash men of the animal kingdom. We need them to clean up and to get rid of all of the bacteria and all the stuff that happens with dead bodies. So these guys do a lot of scavenging. And then another thing that they do is that they feed opportunistically by actually stealing prey from other animals. So one animal that they do often steal food from is an osprey. An osprey is another type of bird of prey that is an excellent, excellent fisher. And so they dive down, they grab the fish, they fly away, but the bald eagles are actually bigger, stronger birds. So they actually hassle those osprey until they drop the fish, and then the eagles will take that fish for themselves. And believe it or not, that's actually the reason why Ben Franklin, when they were choosing the national bird of our country, he did not want the bald eagle. He actually wanted the wild turkey, believe it or not. But he didn't want the bald eagle because he considered them to be a thieving bird, a bird that steals and that has bad morals. In the animal kingdom, it's all fair. They don't have morals, they just need food. And so these guys, being bigger and stronger birds, they use that to their advantage to get the food that they need. One really cool thing about bald eagles is that they actually hold the record for the largest bird's nest in the world. So eagles in general do utilize very, very large nests, some of the biggest in the world, but the bald eagles, their nests are usually about 4 to 5 feet in width, about 2 to 4 feet deep. But the largest one ever on record was about 9 feet wide, 20 feet deep, and 3 tons. And that was in Florida. So that's an absolutely massive, massive nest. And that's because bald eagles, if they're successful in breeding, they actually come back to the same nest every year. And the same breeding pair, they mate for life. So they come back to the same nest, and then they actually build on top of that nest that they already built. So every year it gets bigger and bigger. So that one giant nest was probably used by the same pair of eagles for a long, long, long time. And that's why it ended up getting so big. It's amazingly huge. So one thing that's really important to know about bald eagles and golden eagles in general is that they're really, really heavily within conservation. They're very heavily protected by our government. So in the 60s and 70s, bald eagles numbers were almost down, were very, very low. There were only about 400 breeding pairs left in the entire world. And that's because of a pesticide called DDT that was causing them to eat fish that were contaminated, and then their eggs would not form properly. So their numbers were dwindling. But then DDT was banned, and the Endangered Species Act was put in place in the early 70s. And these guys have made such a massive comeback in numbers that in 2007 they were actually taken off the endangered species list, which is amazing. It's really, really, really cool. What's interesting to note is that it's actually illegal to own even any item of a bald eagle unless it's for educational purposes, or feathers go to Native American tribes to build headdresses and other things of cultural significance. Otherwise, it's illegal to actually even own an eagle feather. So we talked about our bald eagles, and I actually want to switch our attention over here to our golden eagles. So we have two golden eagles here. Their names are Aquila and Goldie. So Aquila is the one who is closest, who's about to move on the branches, and Goldie's the one with her mouth open in the back. And the way you can tell the difference between them is that Goldie has brighter golden eyes and Aquila has dark brown eyes. Now these guys, you'll see they kind of are moving away. They're a little bit nervous birds in general, especially just with people getting super close. So we're gonna try to get as close as we can without scaring them too much. But golden eagles are really cool. One interesting thing that I found out that I previously thought was not true is that golden eagles are actually a little bit smaller than bald eagles on average. I always thought golden eagles were larger, but they are actually just a little bit smaller. They're very, very similar in size though. Similar wingspan, similar weight. An interesting thing is the golden eagle's color actually looks a lot like a juvenile bald eagle or a young bald eagle. I mentioned earlier that bald eagles start off without those white head feathers and white tail feathers. They look kind of like golden eagles, but a little bit more speckly. Golden eagles, you can definitely tell by just looking at the backs of their neck. They have these beautiful golden, they look like mullets actually. They're these bright yellow, and that's why they're called golden eagles, is because of those nape feathers, or those back of the neck feathers. Their nests are very, very large, just like bald eagles, but they're usually a little bit smaller, a little bit shallower, but maybe a little bit wider. And they build their nests in different places than bald eagles would too. So bald eagles, I mentioned, love being near water. That's their favorite thing, and they build their nests high in the trees. Golden eagles really like wide open, undeveloped land. So you're really not going to see golden eagles near the East Coast. They're mostly all going to be on the West Coast of the U.S. And that's because there's way more wide open, undeveloped land over there for them to fly and to hunt in. But believe it or not, golden eagles are actually the most widely distributed eagle in the world. You can find them all over the world, from North and South America. You can find them in Europe, in Asia, and even in North Africa. These guys are found everywhere. And because they're found everywhere, they've actually developed different hunting styles for where they live and the prey that they live around. So in the US, most often these guys are going to hunt small mammals, lizards, maybe even small birds as well, whatever they can catch. They've been known to attack deer even. But in other parts of the world, we've seen really crazy hunting techniques from these guys. So these guys could give a master class in hunting prey. The two forms of hunting that I want to talk about with golden eagles right now is, one, their dive bomb technique. So these guys will fly really, really, really high in the air, and then they tuck their wings down and they fly down to the ground super, super, super fast to try and catch their really quick, small prey. And they can actually dive bomb at speeds between 150 and 200 miles an hour. And for a bird that big and that heavy, that's amazing, because they also have to be able to stop themselves before hitting the ground. And they're really, really good at that. So they dive bomb so fast to catch their really quick prey. But the other really interesting form of hunting that we've seen from bald eagles around the world is actually it's very, very bizarre. So there are places in the world where these guys might be found in mountain ranges, and they're near like mountain goats, and we've seen them actually get ahead of speed like that dive bomb and actually knock into the mountain goats and push them off the side of the mountain. Because a golden eagle, no matter how strong and big it is, it's not strong enough and big enough to take down a fully grown mountain goat. But it is strong enough to push it off balance, and that's actually how they're able to get those really big meals, like the mountain goats and the deer. They are actually able to push them off high places. So I think that's so super interesting. And just like I mentioned with the bald eagles, golden eagles are also equally as protected by the government. You cannot have them for anything other than educational purposes, and only if they're non-releasable. So something that's really important to know, and the reason why we have them here, is that the law in the U.S. is that you cannot have eagles, golden or bald, in human care unless they have been deemed non-releasable by a licensed rehabilitator. So what you see, everybody you see here, from our 6 bald eagles to our 2 golden eagles, they had some kind of injury in the wild that prevented them from being released back into the wild. So a lot of what you see here is going to be wing injuries, especially with our golden eagles, or our bald eagles. Some of them have either partially or fully amputated wings. And that's often because, like I mentioned before, they do scavenge, and oftentimes for roadkill, and so sometimes they're actually hit by cars. That's a pretty common injury for these guys. And so in zoos, you'll see a lot of bald eagles and golden eagles with those kinds of wing injuries. And so we actually are able to provide them with a really good permanent home after those kinds of injuries. We also have eye injuries and brain injuries from different kinds of issues like that as well. So we provide a home for these guys to live out the rest of their lives, because they wouldn't be able to survive in the wild. Now, one of the biggest questions that we get here is, we have an open-topped exhibit. We don't have any roof or netting here. How do the eagles stay in? Why don't they fly away? And that's a really good and important thing to think about. And that's because, like I mentioned, some of them have wing injuries so bad they are amputated, so they wouldn't be able to fly in general. Now, there are a couple, like our golden eagles or some of our bald eagles who might have eye injuries, where their wings aren't so damaged that they're amputated, but they are still damaged and they still would not survive in the wild. So we do a process that's called wing clipping. And that's a really scary term for a lot of people, but in reality, all it is basically a haircut. They don't have any nerves in their feathers. So all wing clipping is taking the end 3 or 4 feathers of their wings and just snipping the tips off them, not pulling them out or anything like that. You just kind of take the tips off, and then they don't get the lift that gets them up and out of the exhibit, and that keeps them in here safe. There have been once or twice where one of our bald eagles somehow managed to get enough wind and it takes them out, and then they land outside the exhibit, and then they want to get back in. They don't know what to do, and so we get them back in ourselves. So in order to prevent that, we do keep up on their wing care very regularly for that purpose. So guys, I want to go take it to question time. I want to answer some of your questions that we have. So we're going to move over here where we can get some of your questions, and I'll try my best to answer them. Absolutely.
All right, so Sophia would like to know, how much do they weigh?
How much do they weigh? That's a great question. So despite how big they are, they probably don't weigh as much as you might expect, and that's because birds in general are not very heavy. So these guys weigh usually somewhere between 7 and 15 pounds. 15 would be the very top range of these guys. It would be a very large eagle. But yeah, somewhere in that range is a pretty standard weight for these guys. And they need to be able to be light like that so that they can fly well.
Liam and Ronan would like to know, do they like to eat any animal meat in particular? So do they have a favorite food?
Oh, absolutely, yes. So they do have favorite foods. Like I mentioned earlier, bald eagles in the wild, they love fish. Our guys also love fish. Although we have one bald eagle, and her name is Archie, who she kind of likes fish. She'll eat one fish, and then she won't want any more. She loves rats. That's her favorite food. And same with the golden eagles. The golden eagles love rats. Those are their favorite foods. But for most of our bald eagles, it's going to be fish every time.
All right, they also would like to know, what are their predators, if anything, in the wild?
Yeah, absolutely. So these guys don't have a lot of predators. For the most part, they're able to keep away from predators. Their nests do get predators. Sometimes being wolverines and grizzly bears will raid golden eagle nests, especially because golden eagles lay their nests on cliffs where other animals can sometimes get to them. But yeah, it would be, and the birds themselves, they do sometimes get preyed upon, and it would be similar. It would be wolverines, it would be bears, and occasionally even wolves themselves, but it's not very common for them to get preyed upon. It's mostly common for their nests to actually get preyed upon.
So Brooke would like to know, how far can they fly?
How far can they fly? That's a great question. So these guys can fly long distances. They have huge territories of 40 to even 100 miles, and they can fly to 20 to 30 miles an hour. So they can cover long distances pretty quickly. I don't know the exact distance that they are able to fly at one time, and they're not often migrating birds like turkey vultures would be, so they're not built for super long, super sustained flight, but they can fly very long distances, tens of miles at a time, and they can cover at least 100 miles in a day, I would say.
Faith would like to know, how strong are their beaks?
How strong are their beaks? That's a great question. So their beaks are pretty strong. They have those sharp hooked beaks, but they actually don't use those beaks for killing. They only use those beaks for tearing. So while their beaks are strong, it's actually their talons that are the stronger of the two. So if you look here, I can show you what they look like. So this is actually an eagle skull. So this is the hook of the beak that's used for tearing in. It's pretty hollow on the inside. So while they're strong and muscular, they're not built for like a massive amount of force. Whereas here is an eagle talon. They have extremely muscular hands and extremely strong talons. That's what does the killing. So believe it or not, the stronger part is the foot, and they can actually squeeze at about 400 pounds per square inch. So if you took your hand and squeezed it in a fist like this, an average adult human is going to be between 20 and 40 pounds per square inch. These guys are at 400 pounds per square inch. So that's going to be the stronger part of them. But their beak is strong too, because it has to be able to dig into their prey.
All right, so Gretchen would like to know, what is their lifespan?
What's their lifespan? That's a great question. So in the wild, bald eagles and golden eagles, they have a pretty similar lifespan. It's going to be somewhere between 15 and about 30 years of age. But in human care, we have been able to get their lifespans to be up to over 40 years old. So sometimes even twice as long in human care than it is out in the wild. And that's because as they age out in the wild, they're not able to hunt as well. They're not able to find prey as well. They get out-competed for territories and things like that, which actually shortens their lifespan. Whereas here in the zoos, they get regular health care from our veterinarians. They're gonna get food every day from us, and they don't have to hunt for it. So their lifespans are sometimes even twice as long here at the zoo.
Henry would like to know, do the bald eagles get along with the golden eagles? If not, is one species more likely to bully the other?
Oh man, I love that question. So these guys, they live together year round, so they get along well enough. But sometimes the bald eagles will actually bully the golden eagles a little bit. The golden eagles love to spend most of their time up in this tree that you see them in. And so that's their favorite place, because the bald eagles don't like to go up there, and so they don't really bother them there. But sometimes if the golden eagles aren't careful and they eat their food on the ground, the bald eagles might try and push them off of their food and steal it from them. Like I mentioned earlier, that's kind of their thing. The bald eagles love to steal food. So yeah, they do get along though. They cohabitate well. They like to sit in their mister, like you might have seen earlier. Both species like to sit in the mister. I actually saw both golden eagles sitting under there the other day till they were completely soaked to the bone, like they had been out in a storm. And they sit together with the bald eagles as well. But they both kind of have their own territory within the exhibit, and the golden eagles just prefer the tree, and the bald eagles tend to prefer the ground.
All right, so Kara would like to know, why do they wear bracelets?
Oh, that's an awesome question, and I'm glad you noticed them. So every one of our eagles has bracelets, and they're called anklets because they're on their ankles, right? And And so they all have different colors, and it helps us to identify them. So we at the zoo, because we work with them every day, we kind of know good ways to tell one apart from the other, whether it's which one of their wings are injured or if it's their personality. But we have these nice new anklets on them for identification. So they all have different colors, and they have all of their names written on them, so that if anybody came in and needed to quickly identify any of our birds, whether it be us or whether it be somebody else, they can do that. So it's for identification.
Okay. Let's see. Stacy would like to know, do they sometimes lose their feathers from shedding?
Oh, absolutely. So these guys and birds in general, they lose their feathers all the time. So these are bald eagle feathers both. This would be a tail feather from a bald eagle, and this is most likely a wing feather. These guys lose their feathers all the time, just like we lose our hair. So believe it or not, feathers are more or less a modified form of hair. They're kind of made of the same stuff, and just like our hair, they fall out. So every year they go through what's called a molting season, which is when they lose their old feathers, and then eventually they grow in new feathers. And that's actually really important because their feathers are their life. Eagles and birds in general need their feathers to maintain warmth. They need them to fly. They need them for identification, for coloration. And so their feathers need to be in the best possible shape possible. So after a year of using their feathers, they lose most of them. And then they grow in fresh feathers that are really nice and neat. So you can see this feather here has a little bit of issues with it. It's kind of breaking up a little bit. All the feathers have tiny little hooks, almost like Velcro, that keep them together. But after a long time, those hooks wear out, and then they don't keep together as well, so they wouldn't be able to fly as well. So yeah, both of these you can see are in a little bit, they've seen better days. But yeah, they do. They lose their feathers every year, and they lose their feathers throughout the year too.
All right, so this will be our last question. It's kind of a two-parter. So Kevin wanted to know, what do the Eagles do for fun? And Paige and Alice want to know, do they have a favorite enrichment? Oh,
Sure. So these guys, for fun, what I see them do, especially the bald eagles, but the golden eagles too, they like to take baths. We have shallow pools throughout the exhibit, whether it be in the waterfalls or down below, and part of the ponds are pretty shallow, and they love to get in them and take baths. They kind of hunker down, and then they swap their wings up like this, and they cover themselves with water, and they love that. That's like one of their favorite things to do. They also like tearing things apart. Our eagles like enrichment. It really depends on the enrichment itself though. So our eagles will sometimes take things like cardboard and shred them. That's kind of one of their favorite things to interact with. We also like to give them bright colored objects because they have such amazing eyesight that having that kind of visual stimulation for them can actually be really interesting, and they like to look at those too. But I would say probably their favorite thing to do is shred things like cardboard and paper. All right, guys, well, that was the last question. I'm so glad you guys tuned in and got to meet all of our eagles today. And I hope you guys all have a really awesome day.